Okay, great. Should we start? Yeah. All right. So welcome everybody to this our second edition of Discouraged here at Recognizing Dance. Before Maha introduces the event, I'll just quickly tell you about, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, what Recognizing Dance is. We're an online platform that aims to be a safe space for dialogue and discussion on various issues about surrounding dance in India. So we've had a lot of scholarly discussions, such as which we call the Scholar Series, where we had scholars such as Dr. Saskia Kirsenbohm and Dr. Amrit Srinivasan, Dr. Yashoda Thakur, Professor Matthew Allen, Dr. Devika, and we plan to have a lot more to discuss the social history of Bharatanatyam, and we want to discuss the social history of other dance forms as well. And then we also but we thought, why only focus on what happened in the past when there are so many issues that concern us today as well? And that's when we came up with one of the platforms. I mean, one of our series is this one, which is called Discouraged, which aims to address issues that lead to discouragement in dance. And today we're talking about something specific. The last edition of Discouraged was a kind of general a panel of various different stories. So they were quite different and there was no theme, but this time there is a theme. And Maha will tell us about that.
Yeah, I think this is very close to my heart. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to all the panelists who immediately agreed to do this. As performers, I think all of us are extremely conscious of how we look and how we present ourselves, and body image is probably only a part of the physical part is only probably a part of the whole the bigger problem, and that is why we call this perceptions of the self, because there is one how you think about yourself, there is one how you look, and then there is the other what the other person thinks about you, and so on. So we want, that is also why this time we have 6 panelists, because we want varied perspectives, and all of them come with totally different experience, different perspectives. So we're really glad and excited for that. But the one disclaimer I want to give, which I think the panelists are tired of hearing from me, is that because I heard this a lot when I said I'm going to do this series, is this is not a reality show. We are not here to discuss sob stories. We want to create a safe space among our generation dancers, and these are wonderful, vibrant people, and if you follow them on social media, you know their activities. They are in their own many ways creating a lot of positive changes in whatever capacity they can. So this is to collectively identify how we can all create a body positive space in dance, and generally create positivity and inclusivity in our little way. So this is a disclaimer. So this is not going to be too personal. Of course, we all learn and talk things from our personal stories, but yeah, this is for all of us to figure out how we can look, how we can uh, move ahead when we face such forms of discouragement. And these panelists are wonderful people. They're always available for you. They're very approachable. If any of you have any questions for them, or during the event or after, I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to help you, or just be there to listen to you. So with that, I am not going to take too much time. I think we will begin with Kirtana Ravi. And we've already introduced all our speakers on our social media handles, so we're not going to be doing a formal introduction. Yeah, Kirtana.
Uh, Hi, Happy New Year to all of y'all. And I'm sure this year is going to be better than the last one for sure. Uh, Thank you, Maha and Aranyani. I spent a considerable time of lockdown listening to your discourses, and thank you for having me officially on this topic. Uh, I think it's important for us to have these conversations as much as we can in smaller spaces with our students or with our families, and more importantly in a public platform as well. Because when you don't talk about certain things, there are so many notions that you're not emphasizing, but which are silently accepted by people, and then that kind of becomes a norm, and then that has so much of repercussions on an individual. uh, so to just, I have written down so that I don't ramble. A few things that came to mind when I was thinking of this topic is that the way I view my body has so much to do with how society views me, how society views me as a woman, how society views me as an individual. What is my social conditioning, my upbringing, my peers? So my body image, my self-image is not exactly what I view, what I think of myself. It's more of of what other people think. And even if it's what I think of myself, it's also so much to do with the external. And I came to understand this very, very late in life. So I feel that the personal is a political space, right? Like how I think, how I feel about myself is very political. Be it gender politics, be it the politics of the body. These things are notions, are concepts, are thoughts, are ingrained with the upbringing, with school interactions, with college interactions. So there were a lot of things growing up in Bangalore that I just assumed that this is life and this is how it is. So I think as early as sixth or seventh standard, I knew that I'm not good looking, and I knew that my looks is not going to take me anywhere, and I have to really do something more than whatever I am doing to kind of make it in not in a negative manner. But I always, and I think that from then I started overcompensating with, in I would love to be the joker in the class. I'd like to be the clown. I'd always be the talkative person, and I enjoy playing those roles then, and I certainly love it now also. But I think when I process certain things, it might have come from the fact that I felt I wasn't good enough in this aspect. So I had to do this to kind of gain acceptance, or to succeed, actually to succeed. So in my young impressionable mind, to succeed was very to be a successful person. It was not just to have talent. It was also that since I am not this fair, tall girl child, I need to really be good in academics. I need to really be good at my extracurricular activities to make a mark in life. So that is something I don't think my parents tried to tell me, or anybody said it loudly, but I just internalized it. And it didn't make a difference. It didn't make me an unhappy kid growing up. It didn't make me negative, nothing of that sort. Until uh, I just sat down when I was, I think, 24, 25, after an MBA, after working a few years in the corporate sector. Yeah, this was when I was 26. And I'm like, what is stopping me from becoming a full-time dancer? Of course, the first thing was economics, the fact that we are not a viable profession. That was a primary thing. But I felt more than that, I was fearful of becoming a dancer because I felt that I didn't look the part. That I didn't have, I wasn't tall, I wasn't fair. I wouldn't. It would be very difficult to succeed in a field that was so external. And I actually feel bad at that time. I'm like, really, this is something that I really truly feel about dance, something that I love so much, that I've spent so many years doing. So that's when I really felt that no, this is so wrong. And for me to have carried it for such a long period of time was really bad. Even though it didn't have any negative impact on my mental state of mind or whatever. But the fact that you're fearful of taking a professional decision because of the way you look, or the way you're perceived is sad. And I really felt that after that, it's important for me to keep saying this as many times as I can to whoever comes in my way. So I felt that because when I was growing up, I didn't see short dancers, I didn't see dark dancers on stage, and all the people who I had seen were like very. They had these beautiful body types, and even our heroines and our actresses, they were all perfect. perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect figure. So that kind of, I guess, without even knowing, it kind of was in my psyche. And despite being so outspoken, despite being so having such good exposure and a really strong family support and backing, and very open-minded family, I still had this in me. And it kind of took me to surprise when I sat down to think about what is my biggest fear of becoming a dancer. And it was just the fact that I was dark skinned. And so I think for me, that was a big point. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that I just dropped that baggage at 26. I didn't. As soon as I gave birth to my baby girl, after I got out of the hospital, I did have a look at her, and then when I woke up, I again saw her. And as much as I hate to admit and say it out aloud, especially, the first thing I thought was, or I said to Rajesh was like, thank God she's fair. She wouldn't have to go through anything that I went through. And then I felt so bad about saying it. But it's not like I went through a lot, but it is something that I didn't want to put on her. Like I didn't want her to unnecessarily rise to something that is so not required. Like, why do you have to because of some preset mindset, why does one have to try to justify that or debate that or argue that? So I think I have taken that a little too far. So I think probably what I do and what I'd like to do going forward about this is to educate my children, to educate my students, to tell them that there is no perfect body type, there is no perfect color, there is no perfect hair. You just have to be yourself. And acceptance is such a big part of growing up, of becoming more of yourself. It's so easy to say, yeah, I accept. But even now when we look at the mirror, I'm like, oh, there's a little fat here, there is that here, my hair is graying, my hair is thin. I mean, it is a psyche, and I think it's also the construct of patriarchy. It's a construct of how women are perceived, and how there's so much of an external pressure on women to look good, to be a certain type. And let me not just say women, it is also men. And also the fact that this profession is an external one where you're projecting something, you're always expected to be presentable, expected to look a certain type. So it's all the more important to be real and to be true. And I wish I heard something like this when I was young. So then, I would probably throw that notion out of the window when I was in the 8th standard or within a year's time. But it took me so long, and I did so much. Like I did an MBA, I did like XYZ. And even after that, I had this in my mind. So I guess these preset stereotypes, preconceived notions, and assumptions just get so ingrained in your psyche that even without knowing, you pass it on. So it's very important for us to acknowledge that if you cannot change the external, change yourself, accept, and if you can't accept it, at least be honest to yourself and say, this, I still feel this, and work towards it. Like I remember after delivering, thank God my friends.
The first 5 minutes.
Sorry. Okay, bye. Over.
Yeah, don't tell us everything in the first 5 minutes. Otherwise, what will there be left for the discussion?
Okay,
sorry,
that's it.
I interrupted you, but we did warn you. All of you have 5
Okay.
minutes to speak in the beginning. But thank you so much.
We really want this to be interactive, so we'll come back.
Makes sense.
No, and also Keertana, you've already said so much. See, I think Maha was writing and I was just like typing because we want to come back to these issues. And we will come back to them. But for now, let's move on to the next speaker, and then we'll come back to the interactive session very soon. Yeah. Yeah, Ravanya.
You have to unmute yourself, Lavanya.
Hello and a happy new year to everybody. Ananyani and Maha, first and foremost, I've been following you from the beginning, I guess. One of your ardent friends and fans. Okay. And glad to be one of the panelists, like Keertana said, officially this time as part of the group. I'm hitting the topic on, I'm coming straight to the point because I don't want to take any extra moments. It's about mental decisiveness. I wouldn't call it an illness or anything, but sometimes we, am I audible?
Yeah.
Sometimes we conclude without having confirmation that we are wrong, that society is going to see us in a wrong light. For me, number one, having followed your other series, whether Scholar or Discouraged, I was very lucky because when I was born, the battle was half won. I was born to my guru. So that was like partly done. The other half was that she had fought the battle already for me because we hail from a family that is very deeply into education and such stuff. And she needed to fight to take both things together, and she did that. I didn't need to do anything. I didn't have that war of being fair or those things. I was born that way, and I don't think it's a great deal anymore. I did when I was a child, but Kirtana, you're beautiful, by the way. And that is not a norm anymore. It was when I was a child, but it really isn't. But somewhere down the line, an experience. I was very young when I earned a name for myself, and things moved very fast for me at a very young age. But also at a very young age, just when I was touching college, I had an experience wherein I decided that society is going to find fault with me. It was an abduction, and it kind of left me in a very awkward mindset. Even though my mother stood by me and she was very strong and she said, "No, this is not it, just move on, life will go on." I didn't take it like that. Within like a few years, it did not affect my education because I thought it would affect my education, and I took that very seriously. But it affected my stage presence. And why I'm hitting on this topic is because we decide that the society is going to point at us and say, "No, this one is not fit for this," but it is actually not so. Whether it is racism, whether it is a social norm or certain kind of a belief, we are predecisive because we're born into the society. We decided there's something called patriarchy, but actually, if we look at it in a broader way, there isn't one. Nothing happened. I'm married to a master mariner. He doesn't give a damn about what happened in my life. Nobody gives a damn about it. My students don't give a damn about it. During the Nirbhaya case, I decided I was being silly in believing that the society is going to be against me, where the society actually was with me. The times have changed. We have to look at everything with a broader perspective. And then I set out and wrote a big blog about what actually happened. And I realized I was getting more takers, and more takers. But I had still not fought my nervousness, who at the age of 5, 6, 10, 11 was written about for her capacity to speak, to dance, to do everything on stage. I got scholarship, everything very early. But with this one thing, everything deteriorated. And it was last year, after so many years, last year that I got back my, how to put it, my strength of mind. And I performed in the Margari after like 20 years. It was a big break. So my point here is, don't take society for granted in the negative way. They do stand by us. And if there is a mental feeling that something is going wrong, talk to people who can talk to people around you. They may tell you you're fine. Talk to your gurus, talk to your batchmates, talk to anybody. The art takes in everything. After all, we have come, whether the Devadasis or the Brahmins, everyone has fought norms and come into the society to take up the art. The art takes in everyone as one. There is no, nobody is eluded. Everyone is for the art. So this is, I'll close it with this.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Aranyani.
And we'll come back to you and the issues that you've raised as well. Can we have who's supposed to be going
Preeti is
next?
next.
Yeah.
Am I audible? Thank you, Kirtana and Lavanya. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Aranyani and Mahalakshmi for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion. Without further ado, I will begin sharing my perceptions. I wish to start with the womb, a safe, warm, and cozy place for a fetus. Nevertheless, one from where the cycle of shaming and implicit discouragement can begin. My mother, when she was 7 months pregnant with me, tripped and fell on her stomach while trying to catch a running train. All I have is gratitude for having born with a healthy body and mind. But several so-called well-meaning people suggested back then that the slight squint in my eye is because of the accidental fall my mother had. As I grew up in school and in dance class, I have been asked if I had Chinese and Japanese parents, and often they made me do this. My mother is a Chinese, my father is a Japanese, and so I'm like this. So I found it funny as a child. I even thought, I should try it on other friends, and I did it. And I was not looked at as a child interested in dance when I joined dance class. And many years later, after I finished college and my personality changed, is when I got to know that from some peers that I was looked at like this when I joined, that, oh, why is this child even here? It's not even interested in dance. And now as a teacher, I think, is it important to only have children who are good at dancing in a dance learning space? I mean, what is then waiting for them in the dance school if they are already good? I believe stereotyping is an important factor that leads to discouragement. Right from being rejected for the Sharada Devi role and being offered Swami Vivekananda role in my school place because my mom had cut my hair short, this actually lit my journey in the art world, where specific type of looks matter much more for a role than a specific type of talent needed to play a role. The short hair actually helped me feel very powerful back then and even today. I took up Bharatanatyam as a profession and saw this look-based stereotyping everywhere. The polite girl always played Sita. The dark girl was always Shurpanaka. The one who could make an Asura face, like that, was Ravana and so many other Asuras. And it just doesn't stop there. A dancer who may be brilliant on stage may be treated entirely differently when he or she attempts the exact choreography in front of a camera. The camera, as it turns out, has a different set of stereotypes and judges by different criteria. Talent, unfortunately, is the casualty of poor judgment. I was rejected by the Bangalore Doordarshan for the way I look in camera. And now when I think of it, I wouldn't have anyway felt so proud about being a graded artist from the Doordarshan Kendra. I think it is important to resist such workspaces that fuel on anything but talent. I wish to add that personally, I do wonder often if I would care about my looks if I was not a dancer or an actor. What if I was a banker or a rocket scientist? I have had my bad days. I still have, where I try to blame myself for things not in my control. But I do come out of it soon enough. And I would definitely thank supportive friends and family and my students. They have actually really given me much needed encouragement. In terms of dancing itself, be it during practice or on stage or the new normal Instagram stage, I see dancers being actively discouraged by gurus and senior dancers on several fronts. Off stage, this starts right from forcing them to wear a practice sari because apparently that instills a sense of discipline. I have my own politics with the practice sari, but anyway, okay. While some may be more comfortable in a salwar kameez or even a track pant or a t-shirt to do their riyas. This thing to always look like a dancer can be very stressful and can be an entire panel discussion by itself, I think.
Yes.
On stage, the problems are aplenty. If Bharatanatyam is indeed a time-tested device of communication and expression, I wonder why someone should not try and talk about modern day issues or use the form to give one's own creative twists and spins. I know some of us are doing, and we know the kind of things that we receive. So I and many of my friends have been at the receiving end for trying out new content using Bharatanatyam. For instance, my imagination and understanding of Lord Krishna, I'll give you examples later, did not fit into the sensibilities of a senior dancer's ethos. And so I was told that they didn't expect something like this from someone like me. I don't know what that someone refers to here. I have a lot of other examples to which I think I would like to share during the Q&A. Now, at a point like this is when I began using humor as a very important device to subvert. My friends have been discouraged for trying out their own creative dance endeavors on social media, not because the content was bad, but because they were not wearing the right attire and that they fully represent their teachers when it comes to anything to do with Bharatanatyam on social media. I feel this also opens up a very important discussion about how long a teacher can exercise control over a student, especially in a classical dance setup. Now, I find it ironic that we are told to bring life experiences to an Abhinaya class and then get questioned when someone attempts to say something personal in a manner that makes sense to them. Now, for dancers who look up to seniors and gurus, Such judgments often lead to mental health issues, which many don't speak about in the open. If you ask my Instagram inbox, it would have several terrible tales of young upcoming dancers to tell. I'm in conversation in whatever capacity I can. I would like to conclude by saying, I believe times are changing and so should the art form too. I sincerely hope to see a day where there are fundamental pedagogical changes. Some of us have already been engaging with this, brought into this art form. A more open, less hierarchical system, is practiced where every individual has the opportunity to express and debate. I hope to see a system that embraces, the relevant old ideas. It weeds out the toxic. It nurtures new thought, encourages debates, and helps one, move out of their comfort zone and focus on creating sensitive and political art. Now, I want to end with this and take it ahead in the Q&A. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to listen to Dia, Sanjukta, and Tony. Thank you.
I just want to add to Preeti's list, a dark and tall Krishna always. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean yeah, we'll come to that. There's a lot to say there. I just didn't go into the specifics, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, over to Dia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hi everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you Aranyani and Mahalakshmi for doing this. I'm coming from a slightly different background, contemporary dance. And I guess the issues aren't so different in a way. My sort of formal, I began also, actually the first thing I started with was Bharatanatyam when I was in class 4 or something. I left it very quickly for several reasons. And later found it again during contemporary dance training, and I really enjoy it. I would never perform because it's not my form, but I love doing the class and doing the practice, and also accessing the mythology and the archiving of history through it, and of course with the few Bharatanatyam dancers that agree to do so, to engage with the politics of this form. So thank you for being some of those people. Uh, However, I'll to share my own sort of tidbits from my own story that are relevant to this discussion. First of all, I want to say in terms of what is discouraging as an artist to me at this moment in my time and in my career is really much more infrastructural in terms of the funding and the availability, the non-availability, the way that we're constantly hustling, doing like 25 different jobs in order to just create work, to pay our dancers, to pay ourselves, to just the constant state of exhaustion that a capitalist economy and this sort of neo whatever, like liberal situation that we're in causes us to be in. I find that actually the most discouraging thing. Having said that, I'm now 37 and I've been working professionally in the field since I was 17. So in these 20 years, I would say 19 and a half of them have been racked with this stuff that everybody just talked about. I mean, I can tell you stories of teachers taking food off my plate and saying you don't need to eat that much. Stories of not teachers but directors. Of, for example, I did 3 years of working with a company, a jazz company in North India, in Delhi. And it was like one of the very interesting things there was not just about fat or thin. One of the things that happened, for example, was that there were at that time about 50 people in the company and 49 were smokers. And so when you joined as a young girl, the other girls, the locker room conversation would be, smoking is going to keep us skinny, right? And so you end up, I'm about 47 to 49 kgs now. I was 39 kgs when I was in the jazz company. Yeah. And so and it's like no teacher ever came and told me you need to lose weight in that way, but these things are passed on very insidiously. And in that context, one of the things that I remember was there would be these corporate shows, and we would have our seniors or our mentors when we were training tell us that you're very good technically, your technique is really good, you need to work on say performance. So somebody else is like, oh, you really have a lot of performance spunk but your technique is not so great, so you need to, etc. So I always got the thing of, oh, your technique is really good, but you don't have the performance spunk in you. And so I thought I was a really shit performer. And what I realized later was that I guess when I was parallelly studying English literature and I was deconstructing colonial constructs, and it was like feminist theory and post-colonial, and then I'm being asked to be like, seduce being Madonna or something. It's not, I mean, something in me is like splitting, and it's a very schizophrenic experience. Anyway, so these were some of the things. So one of the things I remember that profoundly impacted me was that I would be told you're very good, you're good with your technique is good, technique is good. And then there'd be like a corporate show or something, and I wouldn't get ever through the audition. So one day I kind of asked, I said, I just want to know because because I'm very willing to, if you tell me what, like, it's not working, I'll work on it. And it was really like very clearly said that, the client kind of likes tall, fair girls. And I'm really short, I'm pretty dusky. So it was like, oh, okay, fine. And this was, of course, in Delhi, where like the population is generally tall, fair, and all of that. So it was um, like it was a very surprising moment. I don't think it affected me in terms of how I look. I began to understand that systemically there are certain things that are going to take very long to change. Luckily, I found my way to contemporary dance, which is definitely much more where I belong. And so with contemporary dance, I would say that the global dance community, when this started to happen, when contemporary dance started to become what it is today, and it's an ever-changing, nebulous, nuanced kind of practice, constantly dropping older ways and adopting newer ways, then going back to older ways. I really like that about it. And also that therefore it creates a situation where the principle becomes more important than the form in how it's taught. So one of the ways that I can describe it is, when you're watching a dancer, when you're learning dance, or when you're watching movement, are you looking at the wheel or are you looking at the turning? And with contemporary dance, I think you're encouraged to look at the turning in a certain way. Having said that, the anatomical situation of the wheel, its relationship to, and by that I mean this skin and bones and muscle body that exists here, becomes very important. Obviously, you have to know where is your center of gravity. You have to know how you're working with the other body. You have to, etc., etc. And so you reach a point where the turning becomes more important. And I think what's different about contemporary dance from different other forms is that you're taught through the turning and not through the wheel. Then you see the turning and you realize how to apply that to yourself. So I really love that about it. Having said that, in the company construct, obviously there is a certain way, a certain aesthetic, a certain kind of movement that is appreciated, because companies are usually run by a choreographer, that person's agenda, that person's aesthetic. And it's really hard as young artists to not adopt that as the dominant voice in terms of how one should be, not just how one should dance or look, but how one should be. I remember taking that home with me so much through many years of, I've been in several companies for many years, but coming back home with this dominant voice, which most of which, because I think we're a bit more aware these days, but I think the subtext would be strong enough to say, when you're standing in the shower after a long day of rehearsal, you're not even thinking of the things you got, the things you actually managed to achieve in a very hard physical environment, but you're really like, I am this. So I think, I mean, I'm going to end now, but I just want to end with saying that the thing I'd like to bring maybe to this circle is this idea, not just of, I mean, they've all addressed it, but I'm going to say it like this, not just of sort of the color of my skin, or how I look, or, whatever, but how instead of just, we kind of over identify with the body in a way where it becomes, oh, this is now who I am. This flawed, objectified body that's always trying to become better, because that's what we do as dancers. Every day you got to try to be better than you were the day before, la 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 la. And this better, if we can change the definition of that better, if it weren't such a linear better, if better always didn't mean higher, faster, da da da, but it meant something else. Maybe better can mean deeper. Maybe better can mean more expanded. Maybe better can even mean kinder. And yeah, so I'm interested in work that also takes care of the dancer. It's not a very popular concept, or it wasn't. Now I think it's changing with devised work, which was not a very popular concept, where we gave a shit about how the dancer was feeling, because the dancer is just the vehicle, right? You're gonna watch the dancer, and then you're gonna be elevated, or you're gonna feel what you're gonna feel, or have your transformation. But in my work, I really don't think that unless the performer is at least invited to have a moment of inner wholeness, or just seeing, inner seeing, even if it means seeing your own wound, then I don't think they can bring it in front of. It's not true for me. It's just not how I work. And I think I'm going to stay with this for a while till something actually organically shifts. So to look as much as I can at the turning and not pick at the wheel.
Thanks so much, Dia. Thank you. Sanjukta.
Hi, lovely to be here and listen to everyone's voices. I've been taking in a lot of points. I was just wondering, where do I begin? Because this idea of discouraged, you're discouraged from doing anything. Forget being a dancer. Just being a student here means you don't do this, you're not allowed this, you're not allowed this, don't touch, don't touch, don't do, don't. We're conditioned with all these don'ts. And sometimes when we find that one spot where we sense something real, we want to follow that. So I would like to talk a little bit about those spots where I sense something real. I was in a performance at the NCPA where a bald, toothless man with a paunch, hairy man, formed into the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. And a gasp ran across the auditorium, and we were all transfixed. It was Kelucharan Mohapatra. And it was like a darshan, and I said, "Oh my God." But the body did not remain the body. Moment of transformation. Another moment that I remember is I don't know how many of you have watched Sangeet Bari, but these are Lavani dancers from Pune, from a place called Sangeet Bari, and you must watch them. Shakubai and Akanksha, and all of them do very erotic uh, poems, which they sometimes sing themselves and dance. These are big women, like they're physically huge, and she just came and she moved like some muscle in her hip, and I was overcome. I fell in love. I can imagine. It was like, and my whole idea of what a perfect dancing body should be, even what the erotic is, just changed when I watched these resplendent women making unabashed eye contact with both men and women in the audience and flirting. And it was one of the most amazing experiences for me. I wanted to whistle. I couldn't whistle. I would have whistled if I could, as just like a show of appreciation. The third incident I want to share is I was in London at a street festival of dance, music, and theatre, and there was this street corner performance going on where it was a duet between a ballet dancer and another dancer who was paraplegic. And I couldn't take, and whatever she was doing with her legs, he was doing with his arms. And I remember sitting there on that footpath and weeping, because everything that I had been told about, you have to look a certain way, about you have to stand tall, this guy was on the floor and he was just magic. So the idea that magic can be created firstly in different spaces with different bodies, we have to lose the idea of a normative body. It's there, it is dominant. All the stars of classical dance are definitely normative. shaped, most of them anyway, especially the women, the petite, decked up dancer, that image, we need to somewhere break it. And this year I had an injury, a shoulder injury, uh, by which I couldn't even lift my arm up about 5 months back. And the question I had to ask myself was, can I dance Kathak? Can I be a Kathak dancer? Can I dance the form I love? And I love Kathak with one arm. And I couldn't find an answer. And then I realized that the form is much bigger than the arm. Now my arm has started working again. But I would have loved to be the first one-handed Kathak dancer because I know that it's possible and I know the form can change to suit my body. The form has to. Like if I am, I don't move a certain way, I change the chakkar. Like hasn't it changed? And it's been an assimilative form with its bowls, with its literature. It takes from the Sufi dervish, it takes from the Rajasthani folk, it takes from the ballerina. The one-legged chakkar in Kathak comes from ballet. And that's the beauty of it. It can be assimilative and it must be changed, I believe, to be taken into different environments. That's the only way for it to be safe and healthy. And some of us have been trying to address these questions. Dia also put this idea of becoming better, but we never speak about becoming a healthier dancer. How is it? I think our vocabulary and the way we teach dance has to be one of more care and compassion. Not just teach dance, even when we interact with other dancers, actors. This is across classical and contemporary. Also, when I spent a year doing contemporary dance at the Laban School. And there I met these gorgeous dancers of many different nationalities. And I was probably the worst dancer in the school, debatably, because I came with this indoctrinated Kathak body. I admit it, I probably was. But all these people are looking at me saying, oh gosh, you're so skinny. And I was like, have you seen the way you move? And people don't. I was like, you're magic on the floor. Who cares what shape or size or color, whatever you are, look at how you're moving. And people were blinded to the fact. And there were people who used to throw up between classes. There were people who were majorly depressed. And I'm talking about some of the most beautiful dancers I've seen. So this is something we need to address. And of course, like Preeti said, we also need to address this idea of, oh, I need to look a certain way because my guru said I should look a certain way. That's complete another kind of conditioning, and I have to have that certain, the image, So then I think every dancer needs to ask themselves a question as to how they would, what kind of dance would you like to see?
Yeah.
And what kind of environment would you like to inhabit? Where you can just move stress-free and held by other dancers rather than being in competition. Because many times dancers are pitted against each other, oh, she's a competitor, especially in companies and especially in those things, oh, she's slightly better than you. Oh, you're okay, but if you put on a few kgs, probably, you look a little better. It's bizarre.
And
And
at this
completely.
point, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
That's all I have to say, but these were the few
Yeah,
points.
and I'm so sorry to interrupt. Yeah, Tony. Yeah.
Hi, good evening to everybody. A very happy new year to everyone. Thank you, Aranyani Mahalakshmi. If I wasn't here speaking, trust me, I was so happy listening to all the strong women out here. Thank you for all your perspectives. Maybe I'll bring in a little different perspective being a male dancer. Um, First of all, this is a disclaimer. What I'm going to share with you is my own personal stories. It's my past. Some of it is my present. I definitely don't want it to be the future. But nevertheless, all of us, we tread paths. We're somewhere in between the past, present, and like my co-panelist said, for a stronger future, a healthier future. To that regard, um, see, as a growing boy, like a young boy, um, I was introduced to Bharatanatyam fairly early, and I think it was just the way I was or the dance I was involved in. I was very effeminate, and the way I spoke or the way I walked or how I was in school, I was teased upon completely. And like the school taunting and bullying wasn't enough. It spilled over at home as well, to the extent where your family, not even your immediate family, the surrounding family recognizes that, you know what, he needs to be a boy, he needs to be a man, he cannot be dancing, stop his classes. And somewhere down the line, these, on a young, impressionable mind, these strong statements, however naive they may sound, they leave a lasting impression. And when, for a growing up young person, the only escape would be the stage, where nobody would judge you. You could just be yourself, and you'd probably be applauded for it. Like, you'd get off stage and people, yeah, good stuff, good job, everything. But then again, back on, the taunting would start. You would walk past the corridors and people would be sneering and jeering at you. So your escape space still is the stage. You're happy getting onto stage, but then as you grow up, dance becomes serious. You take on a lot more other roles offered to you, and slowly this safe space, your escape, becomes your challenge. When your peers, when your teachers, they enforce their sense of aesthetics upon you. Like, I've done contemporary, I've trained in contemporary as well. It's not so different from the classical field. As male Bharatanatyam dancers, you have to go topless on stage. So, as a dancer myself or as an audience member, the first thing that strikes you that, oh God, he's fit, he's not fit. Oh, there's flab. Oh, the flab is moving along with Adabu. Oh, and then you're frowning. Or, I've had so many instances where dancers have put me down, and I've been rejected by dance companies because I was a certain size. Like, please, yeah, I know my body type. I'm a doctor too, so I know I'm a foodie. Food is my go-to thing. I love my food. People who work with me, dance with me, know how much I eat. And Aranyani would vouch for that. She's giggling away. Like, tell me a show. She tells me, I think, Aranyani, the only thing you tell me is when are we performing? And then 3 months before the show, I'm starving. I'm on this crash diet. I'm exercising. I'm hitting the gym. All of that. Like, just
Not
to
because
look.
I said so, by the way.
No, definitely no. And Aranyani would not be the person. I'd be like, Aranyani, I have fat here. I'm fat there. She'd be like, where? I can't see it. And I'd be like, please, you don't understand these dynamics. Just give me a vest. Give me a cloth to put around on my torso and I'd be fine. She'd be like, no. Definitely no. And then, okay, so there's no negotiating with your choreographer. So then you're hitting the gym, you're doing high intensity interval training, you're doing keto, you're doing, name it, I have done it. Being a doctor, I know it's bad, but the dancer and me, you need to look a certain way when you're on stage. Like, you may create the best artwork out of what the choreographer enforces upon you, but still, including us, including the panelists, we have said, everything was good, but the dancer was fat. Yeah. He or she looked a certain way. They could have got a better dancer or something. So, slowly, even that safe space, that escape space that I had for me, like, I could be the most beautiful woman on stage and I would be lauded for it. Whatever I was off stage didn't matter. But slowly getting on stage becomes a nightmare. Like, you have to look a certain way, the pictures have to look a certain way, and then you have your friends or your well-wishers or your family, when these pictures get posted on social media, they're like, hey, I think you've put on weight, yeah. Like, can I explain to them my mental battles and what is my go-to thing, how much food I need to eat to be able to remain sane? I can't. They would never understand. So, nevertheless, long story short, I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. But from a male dancer's perspective, going topless or even being called by very famous dancers, oh, I don't want to see a sweaty male body on stage. Like, dude, what is there? What can I do about the sweat? I sweat. That is a normal physiological process. If we as dancers can be less critical of each other, like, like another fellow dancer I meet at a performance, I'm like, oh, you lost weight. Oh, you've gained weight. Like, if we can just change what our inner voice is, our inner dialogue is. See, we have been enforced, we've been conditioned enough. Like, if there has to be some change, it starts with us. So, my takeaway message is I still would like to be that young boy on stage wanting to dance the way I want to, because it still is my escape space. I get to don many roles, I get to live many lives, I get to tell many stories. I have the power to create a rasa, an emotion in my audience. I want that power back. And for that power, I want to be comfortable in my skin, happy about myself. And as one of my co-panelists say, when I'm taking my shower, I don't want to look at my body and say that, oh my God, I need to lose the fat there. So with that, I'm really grateful for this platform and giving, and for Aranyani and Mahalakshmi giving us this opportunity to voice this out. As you said, I hope it's a safe space and not a space for attacking each other, but to come up with solutions. To that regard, last thing that I want to point out, I think one of the solutions would be to just know what your so-called imperfections are and work around it. Use it to your advantage. Like, see, I am a certain way, I'm a strong person. So my teacher or my choreographer would use it to their advantage in the choreography. For example, my teacher, she did this work called roots. So she wanted to portray the thin root, the thick root, the fat root. I obviously was the thick and the fat root, but she used it to the choreography's advantage. I hope we come up with more creative solutions like these. Anyways, thank you. That's that.
All right, lovely. Thank you so much, all of you, for speaking and for giving your insights. And I mean, I was literally just typing all the time, trying to take notes of everything that you all have said. Um, why don't we open it out for,
Before we open up?
what, sorry?
Can I just say something quickly?
Yes, of course. Maha, that's our honorary panelist.
I did not want to be on this panel. I did not really want to make this a reality show, but I thought when I heard Dia speak, I thought I should share my experience and my story as well. I don't know if it's okay because this is going on social media, coming from my background and my family, the stigma associated with what I'm going to say. But yeah, I really have to say it today. So I have anxiety. So I've been taking medication for a few years now, and with anxiety and depression and the medication that follows, you gain a lot of weight. And Tony may know, he's a doctor. So I must have gained over 12 kilos from where I was. And ever since, I haven't been able to dance. From 2017, every time I dance, I feel so bad, guilty, and I'm not able to get back ever, even today. After, I mean, I'm here putting up this brave face, hosting this event, saying, let us come up with collective solutions, but I can't. Every time I meet a dancer or even a friend, the first thing that comes is, you've gained weight. Even from my own family, my mother, they are not aware. And I mean, they have been supportive. For them to acknowledge that I take medication is a problem, but that's an entirely different issue. But the fact that, to everybody, every day, I'm constantly told I should lose weight, and it is so hurtful. And I am so unhappy with my own self on most days. Kirtana hosted a workshop a few months ago, and she asked me, "Do you want to join?" I said, "No, I can't dance anymore." And she said, "No, you just join, we'll take care." Like, I said, "No, there's going to be Preeti, Shruti, they're all professional dancers. I can't dance on a Zoom call even on a Zoom call. I'm sure they're not going to look at me. There are 30 other dancers. They're not bothered how Mahalakshmi dances of all the people there." But it took so much for me of convincing to go attend that one workshop. And after that, again, I haven't danced. And I don't know what the solution is. I know I have to, and I know I can't, at least for now, I can't wean away. I can't yet be out of medication, but it is only, I mean, the only ask is a more compassionate society, and that is what we are here to build. And yeah, I didn't want to make this a reality show and share my story, but yeah.
It's not a reality show. This is an interactive session where we are all supposed to be
Just
sharing
wanted to
stories.
share
And
because this opens up a lot, because injury, medication, and the effects on the body is something that is hugely discounted in the dance. Because feel once you're back from an injury, you're expected to be completely normal and everything. And when this is a more long-term healing, and I'm not even, it's sad I'm not able to use dance to my advantage to heal. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks.
stop apologizing. Yeah.
To questions, yeah.
Does anybody in the audience, by the way, I have to say, stop apologizing. This is supposed to be, we can't apologize if we are the ones who are promising to create the safe space. So we can't apologize for sharing the stories. I think it was, what you raised were also really important points about how very much what people tell us about the way that we look and the way that what our weight is supposed to be, and these idealized body, and not just the idealized dancing body, the idealized female body or the idealized male body, or just for anything, how much it impacts us whether we like it or not. I mean, we are amongst the people that are most likely to resist this, but even we fall prey to stuff like this. So I think it's really important to all the more reason that it's important for us to be talking about this issue, and to be talking about generally what happens. I mean, a lot of you have said this, let's get rid of this whole idea of a normative body. Let's get rid of this idea of the ideal dancing body. I mean, these are all things from even centuries ago, when we've read these ideas in the Natya Shastra. So many of us have rolled eyes and been like, what is this? But in terms of course, appreciate the text for whatever it is, but also see that in today's day and age, we don't have to follow all of these things to the T, to the point where it's psychologically affecting so many of us. Yeah, that's my long rant, which I'm going to stop now. We should get someone from the viewers
Yeah,
to
Shilpa
say something.
she wants to say something. Shilpa, can you unmute? Show us your face.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Shilpa, hi.
Hi. So I have a little bit of an observation to share. It's a short thing, I promise. And also a question. It made me think once I listened to what Tony said. And this happened just about a month ago, and Kirtana is also aware of this. So I have a daughter. She's about 7 years old. And when she was watching a dancer, a young boy dancing Bharatanatyam, she automatically asked me, and she doesn't watch too much of dance because she's not very interested in it. So she asked me this question. She said, "Mama, why is this boy not wearing anything on top?" I said, "I think in Bharatanatyam, all boys are bare chested, and that's the norm. That's how it is. Majority of them are like this." But my daughter is very persistent. Of course, she's my daughter. That's why. And she kept on asking me. She's like, "But Mama, why?" And I was like, is that like a rule? I said, no, it's not a rule. Maybe he's also comfortable, moving, because more movements come from, that the comfort of being bare chested. Maybe he can lift his hands better. That's this. And I said, that is why. Then she asked me, then why don't women also do that? I said, because women have private parts, and I've discussed this with you, and we feel that we need to cover. We are more comfortable that way. So I brought in the value of comfort. But she made a very crucial observation there, and she told me, if that's the case, then why aren't normally men walking around without wearing anything on top? But with her observation, I sat back. I didn't discuss it further with her, and I said, that's a very good question, Ma. I'll think about it. But I, as a dancer, and being, surrounded by a lot of guys who dance and watching them, I realized, would my daughter have noticed this difference between male and female if not for, the boy not wearing anything on top? Had he worn something on top, should have been like, okay, it's just a dancer. So I feel that there's a lot of like with what Tony said about being bare-chested. I also always wondered, why is it necessary if somebody is not comfortable from within? Why are they forced to, dance bare-chested? You might have a little bit of whatever this thing. That is my question. Generally to everybody, that why is this forcing happening? So that's what I wanted. And I also had something for Preeti, but I'll come back later and ask that.
I'd just like to say that I think your daughter is very intelligent, and she's asked you very intelligent questions, because even the question of especially the question that struck me was, why don't the girls go around topless then? And it's a very valid question, actually, because I mean, she is not making that difference that we make between a highly sexualized perception of the female upper body versus the male. I mean, even the idea of breasts being sexualized or being something that we need to hide away from the public is something that has been constructed. It wasn't there. I mean, if you look at tribal societies and you look at so many societies even today, or you look at the hunter gatherers, or you look at so many, I mean, the idea that a woman has to cover her breasts is not something that it was naturally there as part of our human sensibilities. It is something that we have now adopted as the acceptable thing. So actually, your daughter asked a perfectly valid question, which I think more people should be thinking about those things. Sorry, somebody else. I think Srinivas wanted to say something.
Also, Lavanya wants to say something. Let her go first, and then
sorry.
Lavanya goes first, then Srinivas. Yeah.
I was actually wanting to share something after what Sanjukta said about her arm. She said she had an injury. I have a similar situation, Sanjukta. This arm actually doesn't work for the past 8-9 months now. I'm suffering polyarthritis, and I've had accidents wherein a huge rod went right into my leg. I pulled it out, I went for my exam, I gave the exam, I came back, and then I went to the hospital. I didn't let the college inform my mother. My professors, every professor of mine knows this. I went for my Yuva Mahotsav, what do you call that, audition with that kind of a leg, with a few shots of painkillers taken, and by God's grace I was selected, and I performed on the same stage as Vidhala, Amrita Lahiri, and then that's when I dropped. I didn't perform after that for 20 years, but I kept dancing, by the way. And pedagogical changes, that's when I realized, make a big difference. Today when I train every student, I have a few cancer patients, by the way, and when I train them, I go by what Tony said. We know what our defects are, or what we call our defects, and if we use that to our benefit. For example, I have a few students whose eyes are very expressive, but they cannot do Mudumandi, which is full sitting. I have a few students who cannot keep a proper Natya Ramye. I can't, for that matter, with one hand. I don't use a Natya Ramye. Recently, I was, experimenting with rhythm, and I felt just like Kathak. I can use Bharatanatyam to respond to Kunnakol, just like you do with the tabla. I've been in Delhi for a long time, and I worked with Gitanjali Lal once or twice, so I understand the basics of that, and I wanted to use that for Bharatanatyam. And I use a lot of chakras, and I use a lot of sthanakam, samasthan, work. And that particular student who's fighting cancer, she asked me, Akka, why cannot I do this? Because I was something which is not generally used in Bharatanatyam, but which is not in Bharatanatyam. There is no such space in Natya Shastra that says do not use this here or do not use that there. If we go by Bharatanatyam, that's the mother of, as Paduka would say, it's the mother of all other classical arts. So everything from everything actually comes in everywhere. So pedagogical changes are very much acceptable, and as long as we bring it within the margins of what we are performing, we can bring in anything is what I see. And I'm so proud that you're now dancing the way you have found yourself a path to utilize your body. So many congratulations on that, and high five, because I'm of the same capacity. And by the way, my mother's a cancer fighter, my guru, and she still teaches. And she was born with a spinal fracture. She has trained under many gurus, but she has never performed. She was into theatre, she was an RJ, she's from IIM, but she has never performed. She was only teaching. And when I first was auditioned, I was asked, who is Jiva Narayanan? And I said, my guru and mother. And in my review by Leela Venkatraman, she has specifically written, a wonderful student of the unknown Jiva Narayanan. So still my guru remains unknown because of a physical incapacity. She cannot do the Natuangam. She's done it once for my Arangetam. That's about it. I took up Natuangam very early in life because she wouldn't do it. For me, Keshavan or some Mridangist would do the Natuangam. Natuangam is the talam that we use, which we use in the tabla. So that is the way it was. So we all have a lot of stories. And first of all, sorry, Maha, a big hug to you. I was in tears. I never knew this. Okay?
I didn't mean to anyway.
No, you didn't mean it, but it just comes out because I mean, I somehow
Yes, thank you for saying.
touched me deeply personally. So a big warm hug to you. And Tony, one more thing. I've read a few other men. You know, they come up with this. I've read Charles Marr's talks, his interviews, and some other such people. This shirt thing is a common thing that I've read in a lot of men putting this up. And many years ago, during the Dr. Padma Subramaniam's Diamond Jubilee celebration, I performed with her. And she had Vineet and other people doing this thing. She didn't want them to go shirtless. She's like, my boys will not go shirtless. And I was wondering why. Maybe the reasons you gave and what Aranyani doesn't want to do. She was.
Well, I mean, my thing is embrace your body, and yeah. So and
You should have a choice.
yeah.
There were three boys here. One was very dark. One was a hero. He was an actor. A flop though, but he was an actor. Another was a scheduled caste guy. Okay. Now all three boys didn't have the same body type. So maybe she wanted to cover it up for that reason. I have no idea, because one was no problem in flaunting. The other was very, very upper age. This guy was young, but he was very dark. Maybe that was a view that they all don't look similar. So let me cover it up, and because makeup on the face will make you kind of look similar, but the body is different. So like Sanjukta said, she saw Kelucharan Mahapatra, Kelu Babu on stage, toothless, bald and pot-bellied and hairy, but we just fell for the art. I've done that to Sanjukta. I've seen him perform as a child. I've seen him, and I mean, it's mesmerizing. Nobody looks at the body at that point of time. Nobody does that. But yes, that one thing is indeed. And to Shilpa, our goddesses did not wear a blouse. None of the statuettes have a blouse on them. None of the statuettes, none of the temples have a goddess with a blouse. And nobody is more beautiful than the goddess. We come in that category.
Okay. So sorry, I have to interrupt you. Because we need to
That's a question.
we have to get to the rest of the questions. Who has a question?
I wanted to say something, Aranyani.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hi everyone. So I just wanted to add something to what Tony and Shilpa just said. I mean, it's a very interesting piece of a nugget of information from history. Like I've read that during the revival of dance, I mean, leave aside the whole politics behind it, E. Krishna Iyer, who was one of the primary revivalists of the dance, he performed as a woman. He wore the costume of a woman and he performed. And I heard that why he did that was because during those times there were no male dancers. because the dance form came from the hereditary community, and no males from the hereditary community performed dance. So when he started performing dance, he was forced to really wear a sari, I mean a dance costume, and present himself as a woman to be accepted as a dancer. I mean, that is just a piece of information that I read. I mean, we have really, started there. And today, if you just observe how it is, I mean, we have such toxic masculine standards in dance. I mean, I don't believe in the whole concept of, masculine dance and feminine dance. I really don't get what that is. I mean, observing the dance as from Rasika's point of view, I really don't know how to distinguish that. So what I was thinking was maybe this whole shirtless rule came to kind of, add to the masculine factor, so that male dancers, when they dance, they want to distinguish themselves. They want to present themselves in a masculine way. And going shirtless is a way to kind of enforce masculinity, as opposed to E. Krishnaiyer, who wore a lady's costume on stage. Now, you should just observe where we've come today from that, when men weren't, able to dance as themselves, to today when we have, men who are fluid and, who are very expressive are judged today for their abhinaya. I mean, men who perform abhinaya in a, in a feminine way, I don't believe in that, but they are just, shunned from the stage. It is a reality. And there is absolutely no choice available to men to, put on an upper cloth or whatever it is. It's a result of patriarchy. That's what I'd like to say.
I'd like to just add to what Srinivas said. See, E. Krishna Iyer, he was in revolt. He had to make a statement. So he did what he had to. And adding to what you had to say, yes, probably going topless would enforce certain amount of masculinity, but I wish it was a choice made based on the choreography and the choreographer's idea of what he or she wants to put up on stage. And as part of it, sometimes you need a garment or not, so I wish that flexibility came on and not just enforced entirely every time that you need to go topless. Like, I can be clothed completely from head to toe and yet not be masculine, or the other way around. I can be right down to my inner clothes and not be masculine. So either ways, we need to be flexible in approaching the aharya in the classical dance for men. Like, even if there are a lot of aharya changes for the women dancers, so it should be for the men who fairly join the bandwagon much later on. Like, as you said, the male dancer is a relatively new concept in the last 50 odd years. It wasn't documented before that. So yeah, just adding to what you had to say.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. Definitely, it's ultimately up to each individual. It's a choice. That's what even I feel.
Yeah, I just want to ask anybody in this panel, can you address the role of social media? I think it is very important, right? All of us are uploading workout videos, headstands, and how do you think this impacts your practice and your understanding of body? Maybe Preeti, Kirtana, Sanjukta, Dia, the ones who have not yet spoken. Preeti, you want to say something? Can you unmute? Yeah.
Hi. So to talk about social media, okay. So yeah, I mean, I don't know where to begin, but then I think everybody is there for a reason to share something that they really want to. Now, the moment you really get into, this can be shared, this can't be shared, I don't know, it goes into this whole algorithm of, how Instagram is working. And recently, when I really saw sex educators not being led to talk about sex and a lot of other things, I felt, I mean, damn, what is this? What is the point of really they doing their job and, not being led to be vocal about it? But anyway, coming back here, I'm not somebody who is against people projecting their practice on social media. I mean, probably it's an outlet for them. No, I'm really not at a space to say don't do this or do this. But I feel in what I'm seeing now, and for the kinds of messages I receive from people, many have told me that when they have not found opportunities, I'm talking from the classical dance circuit space, when many were denied opportunities, when they were very talented, they found social media to be a space where they're able to project it, and why not, really? And that is, I mean, I really want to say that let's take some time before really saying things out. It's okay for us to really have our own prejudices and all that. I'm absolutely fine because I use social media extensively. So it's not only because of that I'm looking at it like this, but I also have received messages from people who say that it is a space for them to really project themselves when they've not gotten an opportunity where they really wanted to perform or anything. I don't know. It'll grow. It'll really put us down. A lot of things are going to happen, just like how it's happening offline. But right now, I just want to say this. I mean, let's just take some time off, especially after the pandemic. I think the online medium is something that we're all really trying to learn as to is this really harmful or not or anything. Even after watching Social Dilemma, I had a lot of questions, etc. But I'm not going to go into that. But I think to each his own. I really don't want to get into a lot of it right now. But yes, if I have something specific, I'll come in.
I would like to add.
Dance is a social media platform. End of the day.
Yeah, well, that's also true. Yeah, but I also wanted to add that I think social media is one of those things that we can't escape from in any case in today's day and age. But I also think that it depends so much on how social media is used, and it's used in such a variety of ways that it's difficult to really say what role social media can play on a discussion like this, or on the whole issue of body image or whatever. Because I mean, I was just thinking, Maha, as you asked this question, I was thinking that yes, we have these projections of the workouts and people sharing photos of how like for example, I recently came across a Instagram post of a woman who had a C-section 6 months ago and had an 8-pack ab. I mean, an 8-pack set of abs, and that has one sort of kind of impact on somebody who's postpartum, just had a baby, just had a C-section, all of that. But then I also came across on the same social media atmosphere, a video that was going viral about a woman who had defied all ideas of the ideal ballet dancing body. She was a large, what the cruel stereotypes would call fat ballet dancer, and she was pirouetting, and I mean, she was dancing with the basically that video was going viral to defy body stereotypes, so I mean, it depends. Social media is used in ways that can be quite discouraging, but also in ways that can kind of
in the receiver
defy exactly what we're trying to do, which is to kind of question the stereotypes and
I think
all of that.
Sanjita has something to say. Yeah.
I have nothing to add on the social media, but I had another.
Sure,
Maybe Meghna can go first.
No, you have, okay, Meghna can go first, then Sanjukta. Meghna, can you unmute? And
I wanted to say.
Lavanya.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Should I wait?
No.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to keep it short because my brain is exploding. Yeah, I think one of the things that hit me the most from listening to all of you talk is how shared these experiences are. Because so many of you gave stories and I was just like, oh, I know what that feels like, or oh, this happened to me also, or I had a similar experience. So I'm just going to quickly say two things. One is on the social media conversation, and of course, there's a lot on both sides of it. But I think I just wanted to add the thought that it has freed us of a lot of these structures that professional dancers were stuck under, like trying to run after critics to come to shows, or asking, people to promote our work for us, or having to run after newspapers or journalists who say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't write about art and culture anymore. So social media has become a tool for us to directly reach our audiences, to invest in new ones. I think that's something that's really important. And I know that when I started producing shows, it was so freeing to know that my seats will get filled and I can reach my audience myself if I understand this medium and I use it intelligently. So I think, I mean, of course, there's a lot of, trolling is the worst, and like having people, everybody has an opinion on what you do, and that can be very overwhelming as well. But I think that making an attempt to understand digital marketing has freed us of our dependence on the government, on our dependence on critics, on these structures above us who are supposed to endorse our work. And I think that that's been very freeing. I just want to take 2 seconds to say that, what Tony said about that space, the safe space not being fun anymore, that hit me really hard, because I have felt like that a lot. I've struggled with my weight, and I know that the things that sucked the most for me was to not feel like it's fun anymore and like dreading the stage. And I've had students tell me this as well. It's like, oh, I like rehearsals, I like class, but I don't want to go on stage. I've seen very talented Odissi dancers just not be able to take it anymore and just given up, because it's like strangers will come up to you and say, you're very good, but you should lose like 4 kilos. I know a dancer who had someone come up to her and say, there are these minimizer bras that can make your breasts look a little smaller for stage, and maybe you should wear that. Total stranger, like backstage at an auditorium. And you just kind of go, we've empowered people to think this is concern. They think they're helping, which is so bizarre. Like I've had people tell me that I should wear lighter foundation, because it's better for light or whatever. So I just wanted to say that I felt that when you said that my safe space didn't feel safe anymore. And I think that's the biggest loss in all of this. That's the saddest part, when the joy of something goes away. That is where we've really failed, if we allow that to continue to happen. So thank you everybody for sharing your stories. It was really nice listening to all of you talk. I've worked with some of you. I know you all to be amazing artists and breaking all kinds of glass ceilings. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, I think Samjukta has something to say.
No, I think it's time for all of us to first acknowledge that we live in very, very flawed systems, and we continue to operate in those systems.
Yeah.
So somewhere we firstly the first step is, I think, to acknowledge that, because just that step itself takes a lot of time, because we're so conditioned to be made to think positive, be a dancer, smile, it's all good, it's a classical dance form, it's been handed down from tradition to tradition, from generation to generation, you have inherited, you're the lucky one. So where do you even start to rebel? You feel like, oh, I'm so lucky, oh, I've had this teacher, and then I got this opportunity, and then I got, so this language of opportunities, like everything that's coming your way is an opportunity. Now suppose if I get a scholarship to study in like a world class college, or if I audition with a world class dancer and I get in, and then I realize that the way that company is acting is really bad for my mental health, I'm being shouted down every day, but I've got this scholarship, I have to answer to my sponsors who are paying for this, and I'm the lucky chosen one. So where is my agency? So as dancers, we really need to form support circles and try and get that agency to be able to voice, maybe just to your friend, because sometimes you can't even voice it to yourself until after you've gone through all that abuse and you've come out of that experience. Only then you realize how silly I was, like what was I thinking to even go through that. I'm really telling this to young dancers, that we need to form support groups to be able to hear each other out.
Yeah.
And be able to say no to the Natya Shastra when we don't feel comfortable to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is this idea of classical is only about 50 years old. I will say I'm a Kathak dancer, but I'm really beginning to doubt what this classical dance business is, where certain dances are have a greater privilege, have a greater hierarchy, just by the fact that I'm a Kathak dancer. How am I better than a Lavani dancer or a Garba dancer or a
Yeah.
Malkham artist?
I
Like,
mean, this is a whole.
we
We should have
need
a
to
panel.
start conditioning from unconditioning, unlearning at that level. And I'm really glad that this platform has at least started these conversations, because these have certainly been on my mind.
I can Kirtana go next on some, about postpartum journey, or did you what you had to face? Maybe Aranyani and Kirtana both together on postpartum.
Yeah, the babies are a month or so apart, Aranyani's and mine. Well, it was much more difficult to face myself than to be bothered about what social media or what anybody else had to say. I had put on a lot of weight, obviously, and I was very happy being pregnant. I was very happily pregnant, happily hogging, doing whatever. But as soon as I delivered, I suddenly wanted to do a Trikala Jati. Like the third day, as soon as I could walk after the stitches healed, I just wanted to dance. And I couldn't even see myself in the mirror for a couple of months. I did not want to dress up. I did not want to do anything because I was not used to seeing myself this large. I've always been able to maintain my weight to a certain ratio. And it's been very easy for me to lose weight and equally easy to put on. So it was really difficult. I took a lot of, like, it was, I think, after the fifth month of delivering that I could look at myself in the mirror. I guess it's also, sometimes we don't wait for another person to tell us that you're fat. You just start feeling that. And unfortunately or fortunately, a dancer, for me, when I started practicing, like slowly started practicing, I felt horrible because my body was not used to that extra weight. Just doing a simple adavu felt so yucky. And I never wanted to associate yucky, horrible to my practice, to my favorite, like Tony said something that really hit hard. That's the best version of myself, right? When I dance, I didn't want to feel yuck in that. So it took a lot of time for me to just say, chill, don't dance for some time, take it easy. Don't bother about knocking your weight off. Let it happen organically. And it took me a lot of self-control to say, chill, you don't have to dance immediately. And it was very difficult because all my friends were dancing, all the people were getting back into shape and were sporting 6-packs, 8-packs, looking like the fittest, best. Kareena Kapoor looked gorgeous immediately after delivering her baby. So it was really difficult. It was really, really difficult not to get bogged down by what I was seeing and to respect my body. I think I learned what it means to respect your body after giving birth. Although I would have loved to dance immediately, but I think thank God, better sense prevailed. And also, I'd like to mention a very mid-senior level dancer I met in Krishna Kanasabha for the Natyakala conference last year. And I think I was 7 months post-delivery, 8-9 months post-delivery there. So she just told me, are you dancing? I said, no, I've just not started. I'm like, really, it's not happening yet. She said, please don't dance. I said, what are you saying? Because I totally look up to you. I came for your music academy performance when your baby was like 10 months or a year. And she said, exactly why I'm saying don't dance immediately. And I was like, thank you for saying that. I was beating myself about it. I was feeling guilty about not getting back to shape and, just not having enough stamina to do. And it's important that mothers, whoever, even injuries, you acknowledge it, you say it, that, you need to say that it is not the best period of time. It's okay to wait it out. It's okay to sit. It's fine. Just heal. And that's the most important thing. So I guess postpartum, more than physical, is mental. I didn't have any issues with the baby, with delivery, with her feeding, nothing. It was all about how I viewed myself. And I remember like at one point, I just looked at the mirror and said, so is this all that you want to see about yourself? You just want to see that you're fat. Is this all that you can see? Is this all that you are now at 33? Is this all that you want to be? So it's a lot of, I think it's a lot of understanding of self. And I always thought that as soon as you pop out a baby, you become this brave, ferocious mother and you're so fearless. But for me, it was contrary. I was so vulnerable. I was so insecure. I was so fearful. Like it just, when I started going to watch performances, everybody like, oh, you put on a lot of weight. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And you just, you know it. And when another person reaffirms that, it just pulls you down even more. So I guess there is no, it's not bed of roses. As soon as you pop this baby out, you're not like Mother Kali, Mother Shakti, the universal mother. No, that's not true. You're very vulnerable after delivery, and it's very important.
To that, just that. I don't want to go into anything further, but I'd like to add to that. Just you're not alone. All mothers feel vulnerable after having a baby. It's the most normal thing to The Kali is all nonsense.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like you think you've done the biggest thing, and then you're like, no, you just feel even more scared.
Yeah. Over to Dia. Dia has.
Hi. I mean, I didn't have anything to add, but I can just talk about what occurs to me, like when I hear everyone's experiences, and it's fairly contexted to the classical dance world. But what I can say is that I think one of the most tyrannical things that you can do to a person is to disconnect them from themselves, is to take yourself away from you, So I mean, I think about all those moments that me, myself, and so many other people I know, and it is very strange, but at least with contemporary dances, it's more women who feel this way. I don't think the men really sit at home with this. I mean, I have a lot of close male colleagues as well, and I've never heard them talk about their bodies in this way, for example. um, is really where you're sitting even alone, you're all alone, like, in the shower, for example, or eating or sleeping, and you're not happy in your body. There is a you, and there is this body, and they are not friends, and you're like, if my body were different, if or so I find that that's such a tyrannical thing to do, and it is what it is how colonization happens, it is how patriarchy happens, it is how all of the divisive and hegemonic forces that we've experienced as humanity have happened that way. And so I guess perhaps one of the things we can do is, at least when we teach or we choreograph or we direct, and when we are directed upon or taught, one can at least stand out one can at least call that out. And it doesn't have to be a violent calling out always, depending on the circumstance, because obviously the person who's passing information on in that way knows no better, because they're a part of that cycle. And very specific to the contemporary dance world, I would say that there is something that we experience, because we often have large workshop residency kind of situations where there'll be like 70 dancers from all over the world. And I think we definitely, there's a racial aspect that then comes in, because men from a certain part of the world are much larger, so they lift like really easy. It's like there's no effort. um, and you might be slighter if you're coming from somewhere, you may be less athletic, a certain kind of at the risk of sounding racist, but these are physical observations, and obviously they're very general. There's always an exception somewhere that proves the rule. Like there'll be somebody who's heavy, who's really somehow light in the air. That also happens. But I guess and those situations can be really tricky, because on the surface of it, no one is teaching a form, but if an ideal begins to present itself, there is a body there which is the body that everybody wants to be. And in that moment we disconnect from the bodies that we are given, born into. And it's ironic, because we are dancers and we're supposed to be on stage as these symbols of embodiment, oneness with our physicality. And it's so the contemporary dance body is essentially a fragmented and broken body. In a lot of performances you'll see, and people will be like, what's going on, it's so abstract, what the hell. But it's such a fragmented body because it's, let's say, a brown body or a black body or even a white body that has seen bodies from other races, other genders, and wanted to be in those bodies instead. So it's another level of disembodiment, and I think, I just going to say, that's all I want to say, that it's a truly tyrannical thing to cut someone away from their own body, to disconnect someone from themselves. And I don't think anyone does it purposely. Sometimes it's even done with fear, like you perhaps to tell a student, no, no, you have to lose weight because you've been ridiculed so much like Keertana was talking about her response to her baby being fair. you know so yeah, it's a strange cycle, and we are identified with our bodies in a way, emotional way, that which is far beyond how we are even identified with. Someone says you're dumb, you won't get half as offended as if they say you're fat. So it's like quite an interesting thing that happens. Yeah.
Can we, Prachi, can you just quickly say whatever you have?
I will make it very short. I just want to say that whenever everyone is speaking, it's so amazing that something that they say is resonating with you, which means it's not something that is, typical to anyone who's here in one of these windows. It's a universal sort of a thing. And at each point and each phase in our life, each one of us has been through it. And I want to acknowledge the efforts that you guys are putting, like Sanjukta said, to just create these forums, because what is happening right now in this Zoom is something that needs to happen on a larger scale, so that when the audiences come and they watch an artist, they watch them for the art that they are trying to showcase, rather than go by the visual of how they look and what they are wearing and things like that. And I just wanted to quickly add to Keertana's story about the postpartum. I remember going for a regular checkup right after I delivered, and somebody just asked me, hey, when are you due to deliver? So you can imagine the agony that, you go through, that, okay, 1 second, I just had the baby. So what makes you think I'm still pregnant is what I understand. So yes, and always there is that light at the end of the tunnel, where we kind of have to also kind of push ourselves towards getting us out of that space, rather than getting bogged down by what people think or say, about us. And yes, definitely, I'm in for any of these endeavors where we can take this message out to more audiences, so that they start thinking in this way too. So kudos, and thank you so much for doing this. That's it.
Thank you.
I think Ramya has a question. Ramya, can you quickly unmute?
Yeah, so it is what I have written. So it is so nice to hear to all the stories, and I could also relate. And my personal story also, it's something something really I haven't even shared it out still yet. But how are we going to get this message or whatever we've been discussing to the outside dance community? Like today we speak, but then when you go back, it's again you're going back to the whole world where it still thinks the ideal body type is perfect and the fairness is perfect, all that. So how are we going to change that in our like our perspectives, how it's going to wider to the other audiences? So this is what my question. Maybe it is more like a solution, like how are we going to take it forward as a collective solution? So this is what my question.
Tony
has. I think Keertana and Tony both have something to say.
I'll just add 2 points to that. It if I may call it an issue, it's much too huge for us to create an overnight change. But I strongly believe that the change starts with us. Like the day we get comfortable with our own skin and our own flaws, perceived flaws, and you're happy about yourself, that kind of joy and confidence you portray on stage, you project on stage, and probably that can start this off. And like it has been discussed, opening out platforms for discussions, like this is a start, this is a beginning, but opening out this to many more people, involving them, See, honestly, we cannot drive this sense into the audience who comes to our recitals to just watch. They're there for entertainment. Okay, we might call it philosophical, transcending, whatever, but at the end of the day, they want to be entertained. So they are not in the mood to listen to your issues and your flaws and imperfections. They want to be entertained. But if they see confidence projected, your comfort level, your vulnerability enjoyed, celebrated on stage, I think they'll buy it. They'll be okay about it. But I think the change starts from us and opening now to more discussions.
I'd also like to add that with accepting yourself and accepting that you think wrong, that friends think wrong, and calling them out to it. Also, some of us are teaching. So let's get a dark skinned Sita. Let's get a puny Shurpanaka. Why do we have these stereotypes? Let a female play a male character. Let a male play a female character. Let's go beyond. Let's try to go beyond the gender and the usual body stereotypes that we have grown up with, right? So I think educating and empowering our students to question, to feel that they have a say in what they're receiving is crucial, because not everything is hunky-dory just because we're some classical art form from 17th or 12th second BC doesn't mean we're right and we're perfect. I think we need to acknowledge our flaws. We need to acknowledge that there are a lot of issues in our system, in the way we teach, in the way we perform, in the way we're propagating this art form, and let's be honest about it. So I guess that was one of the solutions that I had thought of, and also as a curator, as a curator from my side, I think I should be more inclusive of not only body types, of geographies, of caste, of nationalities, of different art forms, which I think I should try to take a risk and do when I program something further.
Ramya Padmanabhan, can you ask your question?
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So the question that I have, it would be great if one of you could answer, and it could be triggering for some of you. So the question that I have is, like, I have spoken to dancers of my age, that is early 20s or the mid 20s. So a common problem, like you have all called out the self insecurities and also the body shaming. And apart from that, there are students who are disappointed with their own gurus, who are discouraged by their own gurus. So they tend to stop dancing in between. They literally tend to stop dancing completely because there is this bond called as Guru Maryada. So neither does a student understand that, neither does a guru understand that, what exactly it is actually. So some of us do not get opportunities or have the talent or do not have the actual guts. I'm not sure if that's the right term to be used, but yeah, some of us cannot go to other people or freelance or perform or even leave out of this clause. But did you all also face this issue, or if you did, how did you tackle, and is it okay to be actually disappointed with your guru as a person, maybe not as a teacher, but at least as a person?
It's an entire new discussion, but yeah.
I think so, but I think it's a really important question to ask, because I don't think it's a secret anymore that a lot of gurus and shishas have problems in their relationships, and I think the answer to your question would be yes. Of course, it is okay to be disappointed with your gurus. Of course, because your gurus are not gods, and they are human beings. We are all flawed human beings. So if your guru disappoints you, that's fine. It happens, and it should be allowed to happen. I think the problem where the toxicity of the guru shishya relationship really comes out is the fact that you cannot question your guru, that you cannot be disappointed in your guru, that you cannot express your emotions to your gurus freely. That's where the problem lies. And this is where, I'm seeing the chat box, there's a lot of people talking about this as well, about, Sanjukta is saying we should allow our students to call us out. We should allow, this is something that I say to all my students as well all the time. Please question me. Please disagree with me, criticize me, you know, because we have to create an atmosphere where that hierarchy and that inability to be able to have a real relationship, and a real relationship involves conflict, it involves questioning, it involves heartache. This is part of what a real relationship is. It's not all hunky dory, let's touch each other's feet and blah blah blah. You know, it's a lot more than that. That is what a real relationship is. So if you have that with your guru, that is a real guru shishya relationship. This whole thing of, oh my god, I can't question my guru, oh my god, I can't be disappointed with my guru, I can't ask, I can't criticize my guru. That's a fake relationship there that's going on. And that's what I'd like to say about this. So definitely you should be allowed to question, I mean, you should be allowed to criticize, yes, all of those things: criticize, question, be disappointed in your gurus. They are human beings.
Yeah, Tony or
Just adding to what Aranyani said, like this is my personal experience. Like when you are a certain age, your guru does allow you to question if the guru is a little open-minded. So it, as Aranyani rightly said, every relationship needs that conversation, and you as a student also allow that kind of interaction. Like if you make it very clear to your guru that, listen, I don't, it's not in these exact words, but I don't expect to be addressed a certain way, or that is the boundary I set. I don't want it beyond. So, you know, I mean, it's a very gray area, but there are boundaries which you can set. And what I do is, when I get upset with my seniors or my gurus, I have my support system. So I go and vent out, and then I'm all back. Hunky dory, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm back on the dance floor. Okay, hit me again. I'm ready to take it. But also, at some point, we have to be that thick-skinned to be able to take that kind of criticism, because there is some sort of wisdom in it, or maybe not, but we'll have to filter that out. Yeah, so it's still a gray area.
Yeah.
can we end the session?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm so sorry, but I think we have to stop now because it's
Moving
already
2 hours now already.
Huh? Yeah, it's going to be almost 2 hours, and yeah.
Can I make a quick announcement? If
Oh,
I
yes, I was going to do
want
that.
to
chat.
for Sanjukta.
Yeah, no, I was going to do that because it's part of our closing statement. So don't worry,
I
Sanjukta.
want to do it for Kirtana as well. Her.
Sorry?
Okay, you do yours, I do mine. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So basically, the announcement is that on the 15th of Jan, right? 15th. Yeah, on the 15th of January, Beej and Arshia Sethi's platform, they are coming together to do a workshop for dancers and for artists on, addressing the issue of sexual harassment and in the arts. And Sanjukta, can you send the link on the chat?
Yes, I have. I'll send it once more.
Yeah, please send it once more. Please do attend. It promises to be a very interesting and hopefully useful. I mean, I think it's a very important conversation that's going to take place there. As you know, the sexual harassment is rampant in the classical arts and in the not just classical arts.
So this is not just for classical dancers. This is for theater,
It's for art.
contemporary, classical.
Yeah.
It is in many different forms.
Yeah. So please,
breaking the culture of silence. So somewhere we've been conditioned into silence. So I think even gentle voices need to start voicing. You don't have to be shouting, but every voice needs to be heard. And thank you so much for this, starting these conversations as well.
Yeah, Sangeet Bari, that's the one.
Yeah, are you done? Okay. I just wanted to add, I mean, we were talking so much about what are we doing and building a community. So this is where we start, and Kirtana is also doing in her own wonderful way. She's been doing a lot of work to promote the arts, and she curates festival, and her festival begins sometime this week, 16th or so. So please buy tickets and watch performances, and that is something Kirtana is canvassing for. I will ask Kirtana to post her link, and you could buy the tickets for her event as well. There are some wonderful artists performing, and it begins with us promoting each other, helping each other. And I hope this Zoom room did that. Yeah, Aranyani.
No, that's all. I just wanted to say thank you very much for being here and for participating in the discussion, and for to the question on how to bring this to the larger public in our small little way. The only way that we can do this at the moment is we put up all our videos on YouTube. So please share away once it's uploaded, and hopefully that will encourage people to have more conversations about this. This is also not the only discouraged series that we're going to have on this subject, because none of these are such complex issues, and they've been there for generations and generations, and it's going to take more than one discussion like this to bring about even an iota of change. So we're going to have definitely more discussions on this. We're going to have discussions on the issues of paying to perform, and paying for art, and things like that. So I thought I'd bring that up since we're talking about buy tickets for Evam. And so, I just wanted to end by saying thank you so much. I hope that this is a starting point for us to continue to have discussions on this, and to, try and resist this sort of toxicity that comes up in the dance world, and address some of these issues. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm ending the session. Yeah, thank you, all of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.